Okay, since we have some preliminaries, let's go ahead and begin. Welcome, folks. For those of you who don't know, I'm Walter Sterling, the Dean of St. John's College in Santa Fe, and we're so glad to have you all joining us. It has been a silver lining to be able to welcome folks from our whole community, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and other friends near and far to the lecture series this fall. We'll be continuing in the coming weeks. A week from today, we have a lecture, I believe, by one of our panelists today, and unless my calendar's off, Martha Franks will be lecturing next Friday at 4:30 on law and philosophy. There might be a more detailed title that we have or will roll out. So please keep paying attention to our announcements and keep joining us through the end of the semester. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome, and I wish we were welcoming him physically back, but that'll happen another day, but to welcome J. Scott Lee, our lecturer today, who's going to be speaking out of and on the theme of his book, Invention, the Art of Liberal Arts. Scott is a long-standing friend to many of us, to St. John's College, to Great Books education, to liberal arts education. Many of us have known him for many years as the now retired executive director of the Association for Core Texts and Courses, of which he was also a co-founder. And we could speak for a long time about how much good he did and continues to do through that association. Just personally, when I first became dean in 2011, I think my first phone call from someone outside the college was from Scott to talk about things we could work on moving forward and how important the relationship between St. John's and ACTC was. And he was instrumental in the fact that St. John's was a sponsor of the annual conference 2 years ago held in Santa Fe. And those and so many other ways, it's been a great partnership over many years. So Scott, I can't thank you enough for your friendship and your support. As I said, Scott has just published through Respondio, and we might hear some more about this, a book under the title Invention, the Art of Liberal Arts, and you saw in the announcement some more information about that book. We are joined by two members of our faculty, Martha Franks and Phil LeCure, who are going to serve as co-moderators or panelists and get the discussion going after Scott's talk. And then at that same time, we'll also start taking questions and comments from the audience, which you'll be able to do in writing or by raising your hands. So the talk will go till about 5:30. We'll take a very brief break, and then we'll shift into a conversation and question period. So Scott, I think without further ado, I want to go ahead and hand this over to you, and the rest of us will become invisible here. So Scott Lee.
Oh, thank you, Walter. Walter, just let me say that the warmth of that introduction is part and parcel of the warmth I feel for you and all of the St. John's community. So the title has already been spoken, Invention, the Art of Liberal Arts. I say greetings, but I say liberal education is in deep trouble. The path to rescue lies through the arts of invention. I want to thank Dean Sterling, David Carl, and the invitation committee for asking me to speak before the St. John's community. I want to thank the students in attendance for being here. This is an honor. I've had some discussion with David, Phil LeCure, Martha Franks, my book's publisher and editor, and Jennifer Donnelly, a graduate of St. John's who spoke before you in 2019 on concerns that intersect with this lecture. I will address you in 4 parts. Part 1, liberal education is in trouble with the public. We know it. What is the trouble? Part 2, why is this trouble? Most defenses of liberal education rely on ineffective persuasives. Part 3, what other resources do we have for our defense, our future? We will answer this question in 2 sections. Section A, we should emphasize a liberal arts education instead of simply a liberal education. Section B will focus on the liberal arts invention of perspective in painting and its generation of freedom, as well as a curricular emphasis on invention in the arts and sciences. And then part 4, I'll conclude by suggesting that a liberal arts curriculum is a work of art which opens the possibilities of students inventing their own future, the kind of completion such a work needs. Part 1, the trouble. Since the Great Recession to this day, liberal arts colleges, humanities departments, and liberal education majors have shrunk in numbers, largely because fewer students apply to these programs than at any time in the 20th century. In the last couple of years, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences humanities indicators show a near collapse in humanities programs. These sharp drops are simply a faster erosion of public interest that has been happening since World War II. The current situation is described by associations, universities, and colleges as a broad crisis in liberal education. No liberal arts humanities institution can afford complacency about recruitment. Part 2, why is this trouble? Inadequate defenses. We cannot ignore these defenses, but they are not a reason to get a liberal education. Repeatedly, from about 2014 on and even before, national reports have shown that humanities graduates do well enough in the job market, though initially they are behind the average for all graduate salaries by about $8,000 per year and well behind engineering graduates by about $28,000 per year. Over time, these disparities tend to converge to convergence without closing. Perhaps the initial marginal difference in salaries given the cost of a college education is enough to dissuade students from the humanities and liberal education. But the issue of recruitment is far broader than economic return, and in fact, we do ourselves great harm, no good, not good, when we try to justify a liberal education through these personal financial arguments. An associated issue is the relation between education terminology and prospective work. Save teaching, an English or history major or liberal arts degree has no ready job identification, as does an engineering major. Liberal education majors tend to migrate through these at least three different jobs before settling into a career path. So the very versatility of liberal education initially works against its graduates in today's age of specialization. Yet nearly every liberal education institution or program makes the work and income defense. We lose in this argument because the terms are all derived from a long-standing, perfectly honorable relationship between specialized training and the marketplace. We also lose because academic complaints about what the world is doing to liberal education sometimes obscure what we might do to increase the appeal of it. These complaints argue that new patterns of immigration, consumerism, specialization, political and epistemic fracturing, and especially the drive of technological innovation are causing crises of confidence in liberal education. Each of these complaints directs our thoughts away from liberal education, not towards it. Thereby, liberal education institutions have come to rely on what I call traditional social defenses, largely on the supposition that if we identify liberal education with something in the social world, we can make a case for it. The most common defense is the education for citizenship or democracy defense. Sometimes religion and a salvific vision invoke liberal education. Administrators and faculty often link liberal education to a substantial cause de destinée. For example, climate change and current social justice concerns. Such defenses fire the souls of students, academics, and graduates who are recalled to the value of liberal education. That said, a defense of liberal education through democracy clearly and unequivocally makes liberal education secondary to a greater concern, as does every other one of these defenses. Thereby, such defenses share a common problem. They have social competitors in their appeals, political parties, churches, and external organizations and majors dedicated to a current concern, including, of course, ethnically grounded organizations. Most of the social claims for liberal education, economic, political, and religious, seem to be comprehensive. But there are the personal defenses, usually aimed at the meaning of life, modern pleonexia, what it means to be human, a disposition to be critical, the future happiness of students, or ultimately student character. These personal claims represent good launch pads for life, but most of these are subject to too many future conditions which liberal education cannot control, or in the case of critical thinking, every academic unit averts. They also tend to claim that enduring human questions, or what it is to be human, are sufficiently central to a liberal education, thereby reducing huge swaths of human inquiry or to ethics, or excluding swaths of students whose interests lie elsewhere. Part 3. What other resources do we have for a defense and a future? I am a pluralist. All of these defenses have some truth. Still, we need a fuller ecology of defense that draws from our own resources and our dedication to freedom. So we need to start using defenses that speak to the locution liberal arts education, not just liberal education. We must speak to freedom because that is what artistry can achieve. We must speak to our own technology because those are the means of achievement. We must speak to inventions because they embody freedom. So speaking requires a re-examination of curricula. Section A. After a career of research into liberal arts education, I've concluded that universities, colleges, and faculties have given little attention to the word art in the locution liberal education, mostly because it's missing. If true, this neglect means that we are not seriously teaching the arts of our education. This is a general statement, and there are always exceptions. So is neglect of arts in higher education plausible? Everyone understands that someone who graduates with a Bachelor of Science degree possesses a working familiarity with the science, be it physics, chemistry, biochemistry, evolution, medical technology, computing, engineering, or lab performance. Further, in interviews with dozens of scientists across America, I found they commonly insisted that introductory courses had to have a lab component and emphasize the so-called problem-solving method, and so that students would, quote, understand how scientists think, end quote, repeated endlessly. Granting two required writing components in a curriculum, if I look at a Bachelor of Arts degree, I am hard-pressed to say what arts these graduates possess, or that the arts are a focus of a Bachelor of Arts degree, or that there is any systematic inquiry into the question, what is art? Yes, you might focus on arts in such a degree, but there is no guarantee. So I'm saying something is missing. In the current crisis, I think there are advantages to the locution of liberal arts education because almost all of the terms of the public or academic discussion of the crisis imply principles of orientation, organization, and response that are derived externally from the economy, technology, political culture, and frankly, university education. In those terms, liberal education is always secondary, a servant to some other larger concern, a sufferer, not an agent. The arts, on the other hand, have a history not only of adaptation, but invention that places them at the heart of liberal arts education discussions for over 2,300 years. Overall then, the issue is whether considerations of the arts can address a crisis and its purported causes and solutions in rebuilding liberal education. What might a systematic turn to the arts by universities and colleges involve? First, the word art, like the word science, has many associations and therefore implies the question, what is art? Needless to say, we could promise students this question will be pursued in a curriculum, a promise. The range of answers to the question in Aristotle provides a scope of viewing what can be involved in reconsidering a liberal arts degree. For Aristotle, art means the capacity to make, the activity of making, and the object made that is separated from a maker. The English generic term art comprehends these three specific correlative relations. Art runs from the intellectual virtue of techne, which is the etymological root of our modern terms technique and technology, through formulations of specific arts as capacities or powers, dunamis, we humans exercise, including those concerned with thought, to the objects of human production. These objects include lyrics, comedies, tragedies or epics, instrumental music, choirs, painting, sculpture, architecture, mechanical arts, medicinal treatment, indeed almost any made thing that usually happens and is not spontaneous, a product of chance or of nature. This also includes the books, experiments, instruments of the sciences, and our modern technology. Thus, art is a cause of things coming into being in this world that otherwise would not exist without human agency. It touches our deepest natures and desires, exercises our minds and passions to a degree of inventiveness that our imaginations and powers of observation struggle to keep up with, incorporates almost anything that the universe has to offer, and results in a changed world that, without art, would be barren or at best no more than a Garden of Eden. Art can ask, What is it to construct a revolution in thought? And it cultivates, educates our capacity for emotion in a way that is accountable and reproducible. Art partakes of the characteristics of our modern disciplines. Knowledge is an important mark of the arts. Indeed, at points where knowledge of arts converge with experience, Aristotle's view on art begins to approach the modern view in which knowledge must be empirical. Further, the arts lay the foundation of the purely speculative sciences because they may involve contemplation. When a faculty of thought itself becomes subject to reflection or theorizing about the causes of thought in respect of specific ends, it is possible to speak of an art which contemplates and artistically produces thought. This is precisely what happens in Aristotle's definition of rhetoric. So the arts tie speculation to the world of action and production. Quite possibly, it is this link from speculation to production that has suffered more breakage in modern education than any other. For while institutions sporadically teach rhetoric, grammar, and dialectic, as well as the performative arts, it is extremely rare that these are tied together through broad curricular requirements ranging from theory to a stage or studio anywhere in higher education today. In their critical and poetic functions, the arts frequently stand outside the normative conventions of disciplinary thought while retaining an artistic character. The combination of criticism, poetic production, and the technological development wrought by art means that art is foundational to invention and freedom. We make for ourselves the possibilities that we experience. Further, art can be adapted to conduct something like thought experiments within our public debates. Thus, artistic invention and freedom pervasively concern not only persons, but institutions, including our colleges. By no means have I exhausted the paths of exploration or powers of arts in Aristotle or anyone else. But taken together, these paths would redirect and reshape so-called liberal education. To be blunt, I think we need a new conversation about liberal arts education that changes the dynamic of defense to an offense of opportunity for institutions, students, and beyond. Art is the path to that public and institutional discussion. There is a real sense in which the St. John's program statement, curriculum, and books involve much of what I am discussing and urging. I have long been familiar with and admired this education, and yes, I think it is a liberal arts education. Yet here at St. John's, just as elsewhere across the nation, liberal education programs struggle, and a huge part has to do with this unconscious or disguised neglect of art. Musical performance is central here, here at St. John's. But to see the problem, let's ask another question. What is missing in this incredible curriculum here that would also be missing in a curriculum found in a more typical college or university, humanities, or liberal education Bachelor of Arts degree? Theater is missing, caught as it is in most colleges by co-curricular, non-credit, non-required performance. I recognize dramas are read. Debate, which has artful and carefully crafted performances, rationales, and procedures, is represented by the mock trial student group. It won't be required anywhere in the US. Cinema, like theater, is a visual art. It is not in this curriculum, nor would you be required to take it in any general education Bachelor of Arts program that I know of. Finally, the visual arts seem absent from painting to architecture, save drawing in the lab and any voluntary student exhibition. Elsewhere, allowing for one appreciation course, you would rarely be required to perform or to make any art. These arts also carry important historical developments in the liberal arts that go totally unnoticed in most curricula, and thus the unsystematic use of liberal arts means sporadic performance of them. True, a curriculum design must select, and scattered pieces of the arts are found in all curricula. However, we are here examining the ways in which an emphasis on arts and invention might enhance and turn a Bachelor of Arts degree towards the arts in a way a Bachelor of Sciences degree is turned to the sciences. Let me be very clear here. The making and performance of arts, including everything from theory to practice to product, are one of the three primary ways by which we come to know what it is or might be to be human. In the relative absence of making or performing arts, including the liberal arts, this state of affairs then is what we currently call a Bachelor of Arts degree. Section B. To see an alternative to what I've been saying, let's pick up with an illustration of the powerful interaction of the liberal and visual arts in a possible liberal arts curriculum. Sterling, that's your cue. Is it on? Yes, all right. The picture in question was painted as an altarpiece. The arrangement of the entire painting and your eyes tracking of it are a direct consequence of Sandro Botticelli's use of perspective, an original invention born of the liberal arts and specifically designed for painters by Leon Battista Alberti in his 1435 work, De Pictura, or On Painting, Giotto Pic. Walter, the next slide, please. Thank you. In Giotto's Adoration of 1305, before Alberti, we see what perspective in painting looked like. Two artists are credited with originally incorporating perspective into Italian Renaissance painting, the architect Brunelleschi and Alberti, in that order. But as Martin Kemp has noted, quote, Brunelleschi's achievement did not provide a precise precedent for Alberti's system. Using a mirror, Brunelleschi had accomplished the perspectival projection of two of Florence's most prominent buildings. His procedures worked from known structures rather than pre-establishing an abstract space into which forms could be placed. Alberti's innovation was to extract from the most advanced pictorial practice the underlying rules, the general case of the construction, so that its principles could be readily communicated. Now, this is huge, since now an artist was no longer tied to an existing object to build perspective. Here we digress by borrowing from Scott Buchanan's Poetry and Mathematics, and for those students out there who do not know who Scott Buchanan is one of a couple founders of your college. We borrow from Scott Buchanan's Poetry and Mathematics to gain a sense of perspective's importance. I have loved this book of his for years, not least because of his quest to reinstitute the liberal arts at the heart of education. But I find myself always headed in a direction at right angles to it. Buchanan wanted to clarify the ideas of both math and poetry by tracing aspects shared by them back to their objects. One of those aspects is symbols, which he exemplified first by examining transformed geometrical figures. Quote, a figure in geometry is the sort of thing that retains an identical character throughout a series of possible transformations, end quote. The question then is, again, quote, how a figure retains certain properties such as proportionality of lines and angles throughout given transformations, end quote. In Through the Looking Glass, Alice is that sort of narrative figure or character, and Buchanan's concern is with her projective geometry, so to speak. Buchanan quotes a passage wherein Alice learns from the caterpillar that she may grow or shrink as she eats from one side or the other of a mushroom. He closes the quotation at a point where, for the story to advance, Alice learns to control the size she is. She must be the right magnitude relative to her surroundings. That's an intersection of geometry, figure in both sentences, and storyline magnitude. Getting the magnitude right of all three is not an insignificant challenge and opportunity, which despite many visual metaphors, Buchanan does not seem to have explored as a visual artistic challenge. Quote, as you move the picture plane of a cup, saucer, or circle nearer you, you have a smaller picture, and you move it toward the object, you have a larger picture. This shows the simple principle of painter's perspective. Varying the orbit of our point of vision, each station on the way will have a corresponding geometric figure discernible. However, no one painted in successful perspective until 1425 and after. So in the question of magnitude shared by geometry, stories, and painting, we might ask, what potentials might attract an artist to perspective, to human, not just geometric, magnitude? To return, Alberti's success in shaping the art of painting through the liberal arts begins in what we might term physical geometry. I will summarize Alberti's singular achievement with 4 pictures interpolated into his work. Again, Walter, that's your cue. Thank you. I call to your attention the height of the human figure on the upper left. Alberti says, quote, I decide how large I wish the human figure in the painting to be, end quote. This decision determines the proportional distance at the base of the picture of what become the receding lines headed towards one vanishing point. And we will recur to this decision quite often. The lower left picture is a then current incorrect practice of creating perspective using 3:5 ratios. The upper right picture, where PCP is the picture plane, indicates how an artist finds the proportional receding transversals or distances. And the final picture is the pictorial proof through the diagonal line that the magnitude of the pavement is correct. Alberti stresses that the lines and surfaces that you see are not abstractions, but intended to represent real lines inscribed by artists on their canvases, fresco surfaces, or panels upon which the painting is placed. I tried this. It is not easy. In Botticelli's Adoration, 1475, you can see some of the chief features of perspective's deployment. Now we need the line picture. There we go. The perspectival centric point of the painting is next to the Christ child's foot. The star's rays mark what might be called an inverted centric line, cutting the painting into two equal parts on the left and the right. The geometric height of the horizon is determined by the human figure on the far right, who, if you put his feet on the bottom of the painting, would have the top of his head mark the beginning of a horizontal line running across the top of the ferns on the wall to the place where the Christ's foot is held through the centric point. I hope you followed that with your eyes. Above that line, things are made to seem above us, the spectators. So to the left of Mary's elbow and shoulder, our right, the undersurface of the blocks shows. Below her elbow, no undersurfaces of blocks can be seen. Conversely, on the far lower left, you look down on the top of the lining of boots. The figures that fan out to the right and left imply what would amount to a foreshortened tile pavement of geometric squares receding towards the centric point, dependent for their angles on the breccia, or approximately 1/3 body proportion of the figures to the right, which would mark out geometric points at the foot of the painting and determine the proportions of figures. The foreshortened two angular blue lines meeting at a lower point on the centric line represent the use of an intersecting physical vertical line sliding back and forth across the painting, which determines the proportional parallel surfaces of transversals near and far. These lines not only place the human figures, but they are the foundation on which the outlines and surfaces of the painting appear. However, remember, per Alberti, quote, the human figures or scene one paints demand the lines, not the other way around. For Alberti, quote, the great work of the painter is the historia. You can say historia, and spell it accordingly. The scene of human movement, which is what we see in the Botticelli painting. To achieve the historia, Alberti wants the painter to be learned in the liberal arts. The first is geometry. The second are those of the poets and orators. For Alberti says, quote, they will be of great assistance in preparing the composition of the historia, and the great virtue of this consists primarily in invention, end quote. To illustrate invention, Alberti invokes the description in which verbals abound that Lucian gives of calumny painted by Apelles. Figures approach, a face is cunning, a hand is holding, another hand is dragging, a youth begs with outstretched arms, a man is leading, other figures are attendant or arranging dress, a figure is clad in mourning, rending her hair, and so forth. Botticelli's calumnia alludes to the Apelles painting. Walter? And there you see it. All those verbals, so to speak, in action. Despite Apelles' admirable variety, Alberti argued that, quote, everything the people in a painting do among themselves or perform in relation to the spectators must fit together to represent and explain the historia, end quote. Alberti's arguments focus on what is going on in the painting, not on the mythological, historical, or biblical background or aftermath of the historia. Historia are praised for invention in actions of that moment, not for their indications of past narratives from which the painter might draw through, though there can be little doubt that Alberti, as did Botticelli, knew those narratives. Alberti's focus on the present moment doesn't rid a painting of historical references, but it does select what counts most in the painting. We can turn the calumnia picture off. Composition, Alberti's analog to literary composition, brings together the painting of geometry, perspective, bodily proportion, and historia. Quote, now follows the composition of bodies, in which all the skill and merit of the painter lies. All the bodies in the Historia must conform in function and size. It would be a great fault if at the same distance, some men were a great deal bigger than others, or dogs the same size as horses. Why does Alberti persistently link perspective or geometry to the Historia? The simple answer lies in realistic imitative likeness. Quote, we do expect a painting that appears markedly in relief and similar to the objects presented, end quote. And as implied by these passages, Alberti notes countless mistakes by painters in such efforts. Yet a more complex answer arises from the fact that an Historia in a painting cannot be the whole story drawn from some source. In Botticelli's case, the arrival of the Magi, because painting is instantaneous. This moment is selected for the Historia. There are solutions, one of which is to string out the action in the picture, like a procession. Another is to paint successive scenes. Botticelli used both in other paintings, but not in the adoration we are considering. So if instantaneous, what has happened to the magnitude of the story? For Alberti, proper perspective introduced unity into the story by making the eye dwell on figures as part of an inexorable movement towards the focal point. Perspective used in Historia arranges the parts of it and orders their appearance into a size to be taken in by the eye, that is, to be perceived, excuse me. In sum, through perspective, we are committed to dealing with potential magnitude of action through concerted alignment, proportion, and gestures of the figures in an instantaneous moment. We can trace Botticelli's use of magnitude by re-examining the painting's human movement, for ultimately, the picture's ability to focus our attention calls forth from an audience its recognition of what is in the scene. Next picture, please. Ruined Roman columns stand off to the left, but Botticelli's scene is framed by a broken down squared stone wall, now surrounded and covered by a crude lean-to of stakes and thatch. On a rise above the foreground, perhaps a rock, which many would associate with the church, this parapet frames Joseph and the Virgin Mary, whose gesture offers the baby Jesus. As the Star of Bethlehem casts its rays through the framework of roof slats upon the Holy Family, the principles of the picture fan downward in an arrangement of all who attend the Savior. Within the frame of such ruins, the eye descends to work its way through an historical scene with a strangely modern cast. One of the most prominent modern figures is the first Magi, who with his gift of gold in front of him kneels to kiss the Savior's foot. The likeness is of Cosimo de' Medici, grandfather of a clan of Medicis, all present in this picture, and the founding patron of the school of painters of which Botticelli was one. Lower to the right, the two other Magi kneel looking to each other as they await their turn with their gifts. These are Cosimo's sons. All three were deceased at the time this altarpiece was painted. To the left, standing dressed in an extraordinary white toga, is Cosimo's grandson Lorenzo, Il Magnifico. To the right, across the picture, and in front of a crowd stands his younger brother dressed in a black jerkin, Giovanni. Upstage against one part of the stone wall among many who are looking upon the scene is one figure who points to himself and looks out to the audience of the painting. This is Gaspare del Lama, who, having had an entrepreneurial career ascending from the ranks of the laboring class to become a money changer, paralleling in some respects Botticelli's own rise in fortune, commissioned this altarpiece and may have requested that Botticelli feature his patrons, the Medici, in its arrangement. To the lower right, mirroring the direction of the gaze, if not the countenance of Del Lama, most critics believe is the young 25-year-old Botticelli, who would have had motive enough to include the Medici. The entire effect of the painted ensemble is precisely the same effect produced by any proper arrangement of figures on a raked proscenium stage, so that the audience may see the action. Cosimo's sons look at each other as if about to say, who is next after father? Lorenzo gazes upward at his grandfather. Giovanni reflects with eyes cast down. And some witnesses of the scene direct their gaze and gestures toward the older and younger Medicis, as if wondering and learning how to kneel from masters. The three figures on the lower left seem to be remarking quietly on the posture of Cosimo's sons. Others on the left and right contemplate or adore the Christ and Holy Family. In turn, the humble figures of the Holy Family centered upon Mary's silent gesture with her child, sit atop a pyramid of representatives of the masculine modern social order amidst the ruins of an older culture. The heroic virtue is clearly subordinate to the virtue of humility. The painting's magnitude, its steady, inexorable call to adoration, asks us whether art is changing the way people think, feel, and see. Modern figures entering historical scenes happen frequently enough in Renaissance painting so that we wish to make no claim that Botticelli was the first to make this sort of theatrical collapse of history and modernity. That said, the action of the painting would be historical, that is, accepted by the audience of this picture as true. And of course, so would the Christian virtue it exhibits, at least insofar as it was aligned with the historical story of the three magi. Yet, despite any Florentine familiarity with paintings replete with interpretations of biblically historical events set into contemporaneous surroundings, there is no reason to think, when we are being asked, that the Florentines and we cannot perceive the collapse of the distinction between the past and the present, between history and art. Still, one is tempted to say that through the painting, the variety of contemporaneous figures are all playing their parts upon the stage and are, quote, assuming their roles for the sake of the honor of being observed by the public in association with the Epiphany. And indeed, the Medici played an active role in the Compagnia de Magi, the brotherhood which, a bit like crews of the New Orleans Mardi Gras, met to plan and execute the Feast of the Epiphany. At the very least, then, certain groups within the Florentine culture seem to paint the painting long before Botticelli picks up his brush, co-opting a biblical scene for their own aggrandizement, and has been as has been observed by two critics in a scene of, quote, Christian piety. The picture, quote, reflects the destinies and dependent relations of people in the Renaissance city, where the ruling bankers in an ostensibly Republican city were pleased to don the attire of the three kings. Still, such criticisms and even the presence of a detailed contract, which we have in other cases of Botticelli's work, cannot explain the power of the painting. For when we ask, is this what the Medici would have done were the baby Jesus available to them? We have entered the world of possibility. We now have a problem of credibility. Simply painting figures into a biblical scene does not make it so any more than enactment in a play or festival does. Moreover, the painting fixes the image in a way that a stage spectacle or festival, given their dependence on continuous yet ephemeral performance, cannot. We are now permanently asked by Botticelli's painting, could this be so? Again, undeniably, the painting synthesizes elements of biblical and Roman history and contemporary leadership through religious veneration, destroying the distinction between the past and the present. But so, in fact, with the Festival of the Epiphany, another artistic event. What difference does it make to the collapse of this distinction between past and present that these are works of art? Certainly, whether we look at the production of the single artist or the collective production of the company, in order for the collapse to take place, to exist, these productions must be separated from the material living authors. Put differently, they must be completed. Botticelli laid down his altarpiece upon his altarpiece's pigments, handed the altarpiece over to Del Lama, and went on to paint different pictures in different homes of the well-heeled. The leaders of the city planned and executed their festival, handed it over to the public, and went on to concern themselves with the governing of cities, armies, and banks. And this means that the syntheses of past and present made by festival or painting are utterly dependent on art for their coming into being, and in the case of painting, their continuation. This is what a painted instantaneous moment can be. The synthesis of past and present, of banker, Christ, and observing artist would not have existed except for the art. The moment of this painting never happened in this particularity, and as such, to have represented the Medici in such an ahistorical setting is not only to honor them, but literally to place the figures of them before and beneath God. Without the separate production of such works, this bowing and adoration by the Medici before any person would not have been seen, and few would have contemplated or felt the emotions attendant upon the scene in any activity of the living participants. True, we might say that the Christian culture, with its exaltation of humility, prepared the way for this painting. Indeed, quite probably without textual artifacts separated from the authors who wrote the early Christian Gospels, preserving the notion that the kingly are worshipful in an act of adoration, we would be unable to identify Christian culture in this aspect or with this content. Yet without art, no one sees this inversion of humility and pride, and it is nearly unimaginable. Hence, only if the entire male society, from artisan to money changer to patriarch, had had the opportunity and the wisdom to adore the Christ, and only if his mother extended that opportunity to them, only then would it be so. And only in art is it so. The consequence is that art, not religion, politics, or even culture, is providing not only the expressive vehicle, but the substantive invention by which we may finally join the audience of the Medici, to whom the painter's image looks out, to see this scene for what it is. In this picture, through the magnitude provided by perspective, we see what it would take to make our leaders in society, in all their majesty, richness, vanity, and cultured clubbiness and dependent relations, bring themselves to the bar of humility. It would take something like Godhead, something that all could recognize as supremely more important than the state or power. It would take a divinely human innocence, grace, and blessedness of mother and child, father and family. It would take a supreme leader. Even those who were in his family would have trouble bending their knees. To be truly at the bar, the politically connected would all have to be present. It would not do to have the three kings bow in a private meeting. Among the ranks of those aspiring to be noticed and elevated, a leading act of humility would have to ripple through the society. Though some witnesses might be so preoccupied with themselves for having made such a scene possible that they might look out to see its effects on others, not only the connected of society would need to learn from their leaders, but so might any witnessing audience whose eyes are focused by the scene's arrangement, personages, and action. This is a conception of equality devoutly to be wished, an emotion moving away from envy or indignation towards benevolent hope, which arts in the widest sense of the term, as made things, have slowly worked into our culture over succeeding generations. It is an effective conception which is simply inconceivable without art. I've tried to trace the parts of the image and their synthesis into a whole, which leads us towards a recognition of freedom. In tracing the 700-year development, quote, of equality of conditions in America and Europe, end quote, before the institutional rise of democracy, de Tocqueville remarks, quote, little by little enlightenment spreads. One sees a taste for literature and the arts awaken. The mind becomes an element in success. Science is a means of government. Intelligence a social force. The letter take a place in affairs, end quote. Aristotle, long before de Tocqueville, remarks early on in the Poetics that what matters in artistic developments is less the formal intention artists take to a project, but the recognition of what they have achieved once they produce, say, a tragedy or comedy. Here, these statements are two sides of the same coin. When artists view their own works with the end of contemplating what they have wrought, they are no different than any other audience of art. Botticelli may well have had no intention when he began this work of insinuating what de Tocqueville called the leveling of conditions. But by the time he was finished, he looked up and out from his painting to see those inside and out of the picture who gazed upon a sacred space that declared all humbly equal before God. Intellectual freedom and equality in image merge. Artistic arguments about perspective tend to lead to the conclusion that it removed the artist from the painting, placing him or her outside whatever was depicted. Yet, as Brunelleschi showed, what could determine apparent visual spatial relationships from one standpoint was a mirror. So let us return to Buchanan's rotating projective geometry that has, through the art of Botticelli, been humanized. Botticelli, placing himself inside the painting, mirrors his stance outside, and thereby reverses the field of vision and multiplies the magnitudes of the painting. The possibilities of art are infinite, not because lines lead to a manipulable vanishing point, but because each spectator might command his or her own. If we need proof of this, simply use the painting's participants. Because we have the perspective we do, it is possible to imagine differently the perspective of every single figure of the painting. Thus, the choric figure of Botticelli looking to the audience offers an integral, simultaneous perception of the magnitude of freedom that comes when one possesses arts. Through a medium that all might access, the figure of Botticelli and the entire painting challenge observers to become artists precisely because of the possibilities arts possess. We can take this picture off. Thus far, I've indicated some technical tools, for example, the discussion of magnitude and Alberti's use of liberal arts, and I've repressed the indication of others, for example, an analytic of the emotion hope. I did this to favor the perceivable artistry of the picture. Through artful analytics, I can state the affective conception, which at once holds the picture together and is the emotional function of the work. I would state it as the possibility that the most august to the most humble, that all humans may feel and act out of humility towards an assurance of innocence offered by the divinity of a human being is hope. Yet without the perceivable dynamics of the painting, without being moved by the picture itself, the statement is flat. The technical tools are required to account for and perhaps transitively to systematically reach, perceive, and feel that hope of equality. But they are at the service of art, not the extraction of the affective concept. Happily, though, the analytics are the available techne of a liberal arts education. They're for all to learn. So let's return to the picture, artists, arts, and audience, because these have educational and cultural consequences for the future. I think Botticelli took the notion of invention across the arts to heart. Frank Zellner, a sensitive scholarly critic, has argued that Botticelli was specifically familiar with Alberti's argument, quoted above, that a painter should be, quote, learned in all the liberal arts, which will be of great assistance in preparing the composition of an historia, and the great virtue of this consists primarily in invention, close quote. Interestingly, but perhaps not convincingly, Zellner argues that Botticelli would have rejected invention as theoretically primary to his own painting, precisely because it seems invention or conception could be separated from technique or finished product. Yet reflection on Botticelli's body of works perhaps leads to a different conclusion. Almost without fail, Botticelli produced only unique works when he produced his novel Greek and mythical paintings, for example, the Columnia. When he produced biblically or religiously grounded paintings, the case was very different. There are 18 virgins and child, 11 Madonnas, 5 Annunciations, 4 St. Augustines, 2 Lamentations, and there were once 6 or 7 adorations by Botticelli, 5 of which still exist. Botticelli kept producing his religious paintings across his career, which included along the way major style shifts and major shifts in his political surroundings. The adorations too span his entire career from Lippi's workshop to his near retirement. The existing 5 differ markedly. Each is an invention in its own right. Walter? There they are. Those knowing Aristotle, Cicero, or Quintilian will be familiar with the centrality and extensive elaboration of topoi, Greek, or loci, Latin, in dialectical and rhetorical arts. Topoi are commonplaces where a person employs to think. Topoi are like variables in math. They can be adapted to almost any matter or situation. Through the use of topoi, a rhetorician invents, while a dialectician discovers the principles for inquiry. Botticelli's situation is closest perhaps to Cicero, who treated the artistic products of Roman life as topoi for speeches. I suggested Botticelli, knowing what he did about the liberal arts and their intersections with painting, through conjuring up time and again the topoi of Christianity, created over his lifetime, along with his fellow painters, quote, a painted art of rhetoric. Whatever commissions Botticelli offered, whatever influence he sought, his work is almost certainly systematic and developmental, since he not only returns to those topoi to incarnate his stylistic changes, but the Christian topoi might be arranged in narratives themselves of what he thought painting could embody in permanent moments. In other words, topoi of Christianity's intersection with its own past, the arts and sciences of his day, and the culture of his times indicate the centrality of invention to Botticelli's work. And we can turn off that group. If the past is any indication, the future of the kind of education we espouse may well rest on whether we explicitly explore and develop those works that formulate and inculcate the techne, scope, and invention of the liberal arts. Botticelli had no idea of the global future that he was painting for. Garnering reputation in Rome and Italy was about as much as he could hope for, though his life and art show he desired change in his time. In short, he was as local as he could be. Yet the significance of invention offered by his and other syntheses of fine and liberal arts is an intellectual freedom, not only which all can appreciate, but everyone can achieve. What's important for a core-text liberal arts education is that Alberti and Botticelli are only two instances in more than a 2,000-year history of individuals acquiring, using, and extending the liberal arts as techne, while producing world-changing art in the meantime. We need not rest with simply a liberal arts renaissance, for the liberal arts are responsible for innovations found in Bacon's, Newton's, and Henry Adams' development of disciplines. Grammars and rhetorics of ornament, assent, motive, and fiction have been written down to the 20th century. Buchanan belongs here. Susan Sontag, well-educated in the liberal arts, once suggested we might need an erotics of art, a formation she never undertook. Modern authors such as Virginia Woolf in her Letter to a Young Poet and In a Room of One's Own develop a techne of art, while explicitly imagining a future freedom, in this case for women, men, and art, while the founders of the American Republic and emancipators of American history, Lincoln, Douglas, Stanton, Anthony, Julia Ward Howe, Du Bois, and King all employed the liberal arts to invent freedoms we cherish. We can take a lesson from all this. A couple of years ago, David Brooks interviewed students at universities where core-text programs happen to reside. What he found is that they don't trust national institutions. Quote, I asked the students what agents of change they had faith in. They almost always mentioned local, decentralized, and on-the-ground teachers, community organizers. I came away from these conversations thinking that one big challenge for this generation is determining how to take the good things that are happening on the local level and translate them to the national level where the problems are. Whatever our nationalities, liberal arts educations are local, unique, authentic, and that's where we can step in if we begin to teach the liberal arts and their technical, effective, and conceptual capacity for invention. That's what can give hope. There's a battle going on in the younger generation right now between those who in pain want to silence speech and tradition and those who want to speak about what and how to take what has been rendered and remake it for the future. Neither know it yet, but the arts, liberal and fine, are the path to that future. We can help them to imagine the possibilities. Part 4, to conclude. The pursuit of invention leads to freedom through liberal arts education. The core of liberal arts learning, the basis for joy in learning, can be a study of invention. We can examine great books, works of the sciences and the arts, the works of human hands and minds, as the study of great explosions of invention in human history. Though I have focused primarily on the arts, the call to examine inventions is appropriate to all the quadrants of the human and natural for all time. But more importantly, the arts and sciences inspire in each other inventions of freedoms that would not be dreamt of without converse among them. So we must connect and relate the arts and sciences through a curriculum that prepares us through conversational argument to see the fullest extent of invention. But that's not enough. Real freedom is not obtained simply by studying invention. It has to be directed towards making it. Liberal arts education is ultimately concerned with the connection between techne and poesis, between artistry in its fullest sense and production. Make no mistake, St. John's tutors are artists acting collectively to produce an object of art, a curriculum, which in order to be apprehended must be artistically experienced, not unlike our experience with the arts of Botticelli and Alberti. From the standpoint of viewing the curriculum as an invention about inventions, the curriculum looks to have an open set of magnitude and perspectives, but it's for students to complete those magnitudes, to complete their Bachelor of Arts degree through their own constructions, be they in the arts or sciences. I specifically advocate for the incorporation of constructive and performative arts beyond reading, because those paintings, sculptures, dance, theater, staged oral interpretations, formal debates, videos and cinema, and web productions, including podcasts, are the direct analog to observations and experiments in the sciences. You draw in the lab so you can learn how to see out there at St. John's. In essence, you can't have science without those, and you can't have artistry without these. We can change the discussion. We can open up possibilities for exploration in the liberal arts education that haven't been undertaken in some time. We can, in fact, advertise these to the public and thereby give the public a sense of what a liberal arts education accomplishes now and in the future. This opportunity depends on projecting art, invention, and our own technology is central to our education. We can make a new future for liberal arts education. So let us ask, what will you, a graduate, be like if you have a Bachelor of Liberal Arts education connected to productions of your own. You would have the character of an artist, a free, liberal one at that. You would think about art and be able to manifest such thought by exercising a capacity for generating works of the mind and imagination which captured your own and others' souls. You would know how to listen, look, and read with an attention and respect for the work and voices of others. You would properly believe, because the belief belonged to your experience, that contributing to and making artistic productions involves cooperation, planning, foresight, reasoned choice, and your own plain, disciplined, hard work with others. You would have at your command a ready technology of production, appeals, reasoning, and expression, which could be put at the service of yourselves, your families, corporations, nonprofits, associations, governments, and international organizations. You would also possess a technology of the mind which you could summon to think about ideas and ideals. You would be immune to disenabling criticism while not losing a thoughtful skepticism. You would have the experience of your own immediate culture and the reasoned possession of traditions of the West and other major cultures over a range of discipline and formed works. And your experience and possession of traditions of invention would be a resource for you to draw upon in almost any contingency. You would be able to discriminate when to act, when to make, when to act, and when to contemplate, and when each was best and when it was not. You would have ways to analyze, translate, communicate, analogize, question, and invent experience for yourselves and others. You would be able to examine science, art, politics, business and economic affairs, religion, culture, communities, neighborhoods, families, and friends with an eye to human passions and the confidence, charity, faith, and hope that belongs to those who hold the future. Finally, you would know how to look out upon the achievements of humanity to discover with wonder and appreciation, not only what a precious thing our humanity is, but how to bring your vision of a liberal arts education to a wider public for the sake of humanity's future. No one discipline can build either such a character or offer such a degree, but a humanistic liberal arts education can. Nationally and internationally, the reason for including core texts or pivotal works of arts and sciences then is that they offer to students considerations of what is best and what ways are best to produce what they think is best over and over again. That consideration of such texts, that examination will inspire moments which reshape and grow our students' humanity and our own. But the students will only know if they are free if they use their curricular arts to make what has, up to the moment, not been brought into existence before. This is the ultimate argument for the liberal arts. Whether we foreground it or not, a liberal arts education steeped in the achievements of humanity is a study in invention. When we foreground it, invention in art, including the liberal arts, is not only an inevitable expression of our humanity, it becomes a maker of our freedom. Liberal arts education is a best hope of meeting the challenges that we face, challenges that will require all the inventiveness we can offer. Thank you.
Scott, since you're back, I'd encourage us to go ahead and get started in just a moment. So we will begin in a moment by hearing comments from our two panelists, comments or questions from my colleagues, Phil LaCure and Martha Franks, both of whom know Scott and his work well and have been quite engaged with ACTC over the years and are interested in the arts broadly and the themes of this lecture. Then we'll open things up for discussion with the audience. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, there are two ways you can engage. There's a Q&A box, which if you open, you can type in questions, which we'll see. You can also raise your hand. There's a button for that. And that would allow us to turn on your microphone and hear your question or comment live voice. So in a few minutes, we'll turn to that. We haven't talked about order here. I wonder if, let's see, Martha, we were talking some before the lecture. Would you be prepared, unless Scott, there's something you want to say to get us started? Maybe I'd let Martha get the conversation going, and then we'll let Phil come in after that.
I'm happy to start.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you. That was really, really fascinating and hopeful, which is a great pleasure to hear. I think that the place where I would appreciate just a little more help has to do with your observation from the painting that art can show us this instantaneous and of course impossible in real life connection between the past and the present, and orient the figures in the painting in that symbolic way, to convey, and in the case of this painting, to convey a sort of gift of equality that you couldn't see if you just went to the Medici court.
No, not likely. No.
And so I was very interested in that, and connecting that with the recognition of one's own perspective and making something from one's own perspective. Is that what leads to equality, and most especially to freedom?
That's a good complex question. Let's take a few, take a piece here and there. And by the way, I'd almost invite anybody to come rescue me and jump into the conversation. In the meantime, look, I think if we only had one perspective on something, we'd all say that we didn't have much in the way of freedom, right? I mean, it's a nice to have one perspective, but whether we've been historically trained or whether it's comes by nature, by humanity, none of us all share just one perspective on something, and that's it. So now the question becomes, well, if you have a wider variety of perspectives, if there's more than one, if there's two and many, is that offering a perspective freedom? Well, I think the way to answer this artistically is it becomes freedom as you have to work with an art of your own choosing to begin to slowly but surely develop that perspective, okay? To be able to notice, if to take the painting metaphor for a second, what's in your field of view, and to be able to both articulate it, or if you're painting it, to put it there. Only then are you really beginning to develop a freedom. And that really does depend on the acquisition of a techne, of an artistry of some sort. And it takes, I do believe that there are people who have multiple arts. I know this, but I think it takes time. And I don't think that you can, you can't get it by buying a hamburger. It just doesn't work that way. So I would say that, that to begin to initially answer your question, no perspective is just given. No perspective is just automatically there. It's rather something that you come to and that you begin to build. And by the way, this takes up, I might add, there was a note in the lecture about being able to speak about reflective arts, that there are arts that we look at where we're looking at our own thought. And that's part of that process of developing a perspective, if you wish. And I think I tried to say that in this particular painting, that's what Botticelli actually did. He started looking at his own art. And then he looked at it for the sake of others, since he had brought so many people into this particular painting. More broadly, I think that perhaps people, as they begin to look and appreciate what arts others have, begin to realize just how much freedom there is in the world that happens only because people take the effort and time to acquire an art. Does that begin to go where you were asking?
Yeah, no, Thank you. You sharpened my question considerably by putting it in terms of the relationship between perspective and freedom, and then emphasizing the need for production. I had another stray question, and then I'll let other people jump in. But in developing a techne, is part of the techne that you need the sort of acquisition of these topoi that can serve as a kind of common language?
Um, Again, I'll repeat what I said to begin with, because I think it's really important to think about this in this way. Topoi are at their best places where you go to think. And yes, they can be common, and it's sort of, but it's not that they're automatically common. Both Aristotle and Cicero develop at length these topoi. But you don't use them all on any given effort that you're doing. You might possess them all either as a handbook, or you might possess them as something that is in your head to use, right? But you don't use them all. You have to make a selection out of them. And then you have to slowly but surely put them together. And then when you get them put together, you might have a set of inferences or a line of argument. But then if you're concerned with rhetoric, you want to persuade somebody. So you have to ask whether the line of argument, which refers all the way back to these topoi, is actually persuasive. And it's always to whom? To whom is this persuasive? For whom is this a commonplace? For whom is this a topoi, a loci? I think that you have a better chance of finding, how to put this? You have a better chance of finding the topoi you need, the way to characterize a situation, the way to begin to think about statements you might want to make, or the way to begin to think about the painting you might want, the paint you might want to use. If you have a kind of provisional sense, a very provisional sense of what your audience might be, and a provisional sense of where you're going. But all of that is subject, again, to the whole interaction of artistry. You may find that your audience is rather different, or you might find, and so all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I was thinking that what we could talk about was, honor.
Oh no.
Scott, you're frozen.
I don't think he can hear us.
The honorable, and I can hear you now.
Good.
We lost you for a minute there, Scott.
Am I back?
Yes.
You are back now through whatever act of invention brought you back.
That's good. How much did you lose? A lot or little?
You were thinking we could talk about honor, and then you froze.
Yes. Okay. So you might think that you'll talk about honor to your audience, but then it might occur to you that you really need to emphasize virtue, and honor and virtue are not necessarily always the same thing. So you'll go to commonplaces about virtue or to commonplaces about honor. And the same, I mean, we could go on about, you might think that what you want to stir in your audience is confidence. But then maybe it would be better that your audience saw a situation as one to get angry about rather than confident about. And so what you need to do is you need to know some of the commonplaces about what people feel makes them confident and what makes them angry. Am I making some sense here to people, I hope? Okay. Have I begun to answer the question?
I think so. And you were speaking more learnedly than I'm capable of doing with regard to topoi, because what I was thinking in a naive way is that what filled the role of topoi in this painting are the Christian traditions and stories. So, use of the adoration of the Magi can be chosen as a particularly persuasive moment with regard to the equality of humanity at the feet of God.
I mean, you've stated this perfectly.
Okay.
You really have. You made the whole case. It took me an hour. It took you 1 minute. You know what I mean? So really, seriously, it's a perfect statement. And by the way, if you think about the homiletic tradition, the tradition where you go to, I can't speak to the Jewish tradition, but I can speak to both the Catholic and Protestant traditions, and you go and you're going to have readings from the Old and New Testament. And those usually then shape the sermon. It's the homiletic tradition. And what they're doing is they're treating those verses as topoi, commonplaces, out of which they can build the sermon, the homily.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Scott, is it all right if I come in at this moment from a slightly different angle? I know my microphone is a little dicey, so I'm trying to be clear, hoping that I'm succeeding. I want to ask you to distinguish your primary consideration here, invention, from another word, which is delusion.
I'm sorry, what?
Which is delusion.
Delusion.
The way I would try to pose this question is to invoke G.H. Hardy's comment in his little book about a mathematician's apology. And he asked the question, what makes a mathematical theorem significant? And he says it has two opposing qualities. One is that it's unexpected, surprising, and the other is that it's necessary. And in your remarks about invention, I hear unexpected and surprising and presenting things that have never existed and that have never existed before. But I'm not hearing as much about what would make those claims on an audience necessary, what would make them compelling. And if they're
Well,
not,
I guess, okay, I'm sorry.
I was just rambling on. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I don't think you were rambling on here, Phil, at all, but I do think that we shouldn't disregard, I'm not going to shift away from it or land on it, but we shouldn't disregard the possible as being extraordinarily compelling. When you can make a case for the possible, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, the first thing you should bear in mind is that the possible is usually something that doesn't exist. It comes into existence. And so a lot of it has to do with the idea that, or the process, or the construction of what's required in order, what's necessary in order to get to what's possible. And this shows up in this lecture. The most overt way it shows up is when I make basically the turn to asking, what would it be like if the Medici really did actually have to bow in what amounts to the stable where Christ was born? And what would it be required to get this kind of humility? Well, you have to have Godhead. That's necessary. Something that that everybody recognizes is more important than the state or power. You have to have, say, a supreme leader. If you don't have a supreme leader, not only will there be no act of humility, but then it won't ripple. And so I kind of went down in a declension. Am I making myself clear on this?
Very clear. And I guess I would ask you to translate that response from the painting into a modern secular world where it's very difficult for a presenter, for an artist, or for a speaker to appeal to a divinity.
Well,
Short of something that's true beyond the considerations of the material world. Short of that, how could there be something truly compelling and not just propaganda, successful as propaganda?
it's very tempting to go off to our current political discussions. I think I'm going to purposefully avoid that. I can take it up, but I think I'd rather avoid it because I think it simply would obscure any further discussion. Myself, I might be asking in any given artwork, any given even scientific work, what do you need to have this artwork? What do you need to have this novel? What do you need to have this poem to get it from the beginning to the end? What do you have to have? Why is this word there? Why is this sentence there? Why is this paragraph, this chapter? Why can't you just switch the order around? Why couldn't you just toss it up? Why can't you just throw it up into the air? What is it that is compelling, as you put it, about the way it was produced? And in some cases, of course, famous cases, Fitzgerald's books kept getting, one of them, I've forgotten the title now, it's just, help me out on this, was published first in the order of part 2, part 1, part 3, and then was published later in the order of part 1, part 2, part 3. So so this is a serious artistic problem for anything to be made and for it to be compelling. And I don't think that you can just simply, unfortunately, I don't think that there's actually really a formula for this other than the really practiced study of what are these works trying to achieve, what will they accomplish, how do they do it, and so forth.
But I want to urge, I don't want to go on the whole time about this, but I want to urge one more installment of the question here, which is, doesn't an invention that becomes something more than an invention have to end up showing me something that's more true than what I thought was true before I encountered it? That it can't just be interesting and complex. In some way, it has to be more true in order to pass the test.
Well, I'm going to say provisionally that is likely to be truer of scientific and mathematical modeling than it is to be truer of artistic making. There, the real emphasis, again, is on what might be, not even necessarily true, but what might be. What could happen? What could come into existence? What could human beings experience? What could they feel? What kind of person would it take to be in a situation like this and to go about it? I am not certain that that's best analyzed by questions of truth. I think it might I might be willing to argue it's better analyzed by questions of beauty, but beauty would be specific to different forms. So I don't think that the question of truth is irrelevant, but I think it might be secondary depending on what kind of invention from what we're dealing with, what kind of invention out of what realm we're dealing with. Now, let me say one thing. I learned something very important long ago. I happened to, while I was doing my dissertation, I also happened to be getting a library degree, and the library degree required that I have a, I do some programming. And the programming that we did was as close to machine language as you can get. So it was almost like watching the magnet spin. I mean, it was almost about that basic. And one of the things that I learned, or one of the things I felt while I was writing my dissertation was that I would write these chapters, and I would work at it and redraft and work. And I felt as if finally I had, and felt is the right word here, I had arrived at the truth. It was a definite felt feeling. When I started learning how to program, I learned that if you didn't believe it would work, if you didn't feel it was true as a program in the sense that the steps will start from the beginning and get to the end like it's supposed to, then it never worked. You couldn't guess your way. You couldn't chance your way to it. You had to feel that it was true. And then eventually after some mistakes, the feeling actually converged with the programming, which then produced the result you wanted. So my dissertation was on Bernard Shaw's comedies. And I felt I was writing a criticism about what was going on in the plays. And so I felt I had to be true to the plays themselves, but the plays weren't trying to be true to criticism. They were trying to be comedies. And so you had to be able to distinguish what would work in the comedies versus what would be true about my own statements. Does that get closer to what you want?
No, it's an interesting issue. I think I think there was perhaps in the background of my question ever so delicate reference to contemporary questions that we're all living through right now. But no, what you say seems very helpful to me, but also dangerous.
May I suggest we bring some other voices in, and maybe we'll circle that back around to that. I see that David Carl has his hand raised in the audience. I thought we might go ahead and take another question or comment. And I just invite audience members, if you have questions or comments, you can write them in the Q&A or you can raise your hands. So, Mr. Carl, you should be able to unmute yourself there.
Not sure I hear it.
No, I don't hear it either.
Yeah, he says he's having some audio problems. Why don't you go ahead and type in a question, Mr. Carl, or we'll come back to you as he's typed in the chat.
Type it into the chat, David.
Mm-hmm. In the meantime, if others have questions, and in the meantime,
I can do a follow-up to how I understood Phil's question, because I was wondering, Scott, it interested me that the example you gave of invention was a skill of the artist, the invention of perspective, something that the artist would need to be master of in order to make the kinds of historia statements that he wanted to make. So that it's not, your answer to Phil suggested that maybe in writing or painting, truth didn't matter so much because we were looking at possibility, as opposed to science and mathematics where it's much more like discovery. But the example you give is a kind of geometrical skill that allows for greater expression. So we're not talking about a science fiction story where you have a planet that somebody dreamed up. It's just kind of fun to meditate on. What if it existed? We're talking about a contribution to the possibilities of expression. Is that an accident that that's the example you chose in the terms of Phil's question? I'm not sure I'm making myself clear.
Well, let me just say that I always get worried. I'll be straightforward about this. I always get worried when artists talk about in terms of expression, because then there's always a subject matter. There's always a race there, and the art is merely the whereabout. And so the be it the truth or whatever is important belongs to content, and oftentimes the content turns out to be, in this case, you could have a scientific trace to it. I mean, you could go all the way back to Euclid's optics and to his geometry. Okay, there's no question in my mind that perspective was a invention. One might make a case that Ptolemy did it earlier in some of his cartography, but not really. And so perspective was an invention of painting, but the real thrust of the argument wasn't about perspective, though I admit readily that I return to it. The real thrust of the argument was about how painting took, and a concern with action in painting took and changed perspective, transformed it into magnitude, okay, into a wholeness with a lot of parts in it that that had a definite movement to it, and that was I think that while it's quite true to say that perspective was developed and gave until somewhere into the early 20th century a unified field to painting, a unified vision field to painting. There's no argument about this. The question really is, what do artists do with it? And I thought that through the use of magnitude, Botticelli made a pretty, made it possible to think about equality, feel, to hope for equality, not just to think about it. And so I do think, going back to your earlier question, there is a lot of there are a lot of such possibilities that are offered by perspective, and that are taken and developed by perspective. But that doesn't, that wouldn't, I don't think that this gets us any further in the discussion if what we're trying to do is to see whether arts are not simply the means that science or philosophy employs for truth. If we think that, I'm not saying, of course, I'm not saying truth isn't involved. What I am saying is that it may be that when you're bringing something into existence that didn't exist before, you might actually be opening up the world that, in a way that never had happened before. And that's why I did choose this painting and made the connection to de Tocqueville. It's a case in point. And I would think actually that an awful lot of people at St. John's with that amazing curriculum would have a sense of this, of how, for example, perhaps this can be argued, um, how novels really of the 20th century were really quite a bit different from Homer. They just aren't the same. they explored some things that Homer didn't do. So that means that the experience that people have of their own world, or even the limited world of the novel, is substantively different than the auditors of a rhapsode of Homer, independent of any historical circumstances other than the inventions of the arts and sciences themselves.
Okay.
Scott,
And it's, yeah,
oh,
sorry.
excuse me. Go ahead, Martha.
I was just going to sort of remark that you're finding it hard to use the word true for that difference one way or the other.
I don't have to use it, and here's the reason why. It's because people like Scott Buchanan do use it and use it well. And I don't, I'm not concerned with exploring something in which the liberal arts have done a fantastic job over a long period of time. I'm concerned with exploring something where I think the liberal arts has either not been recognized for what it has accomplished or is not recognized for what it might accomplish. And that's the reason for this. And I do think, I don't think I'm being sophistical in the worst sense. I'm happy to admit or discuss truth if we wish to have it. It's perfectly fine. But I do want to emphasize, look, if I said to you, let me try it a different way. If I said to you, I'm interested in the imagination. Well, our cultural times have prepared us since about the beginning of the 19th century. Our cultural has prepared us, and yes, there are earlier discussions, but our culture has really prepared us to talk in terms of imagination and creativity. I have, if we want to speak in those terms, that's fine. I thought that to speak in terms of invention took the conversation and the roots of that discussion much further back.
Scott, we did get David Carl's question in writing. And again, I'll just invite members of the audience to share questions or comments if they wish. So David writes, Scott, great talk. Really enjoyed it. And it fits with many thoughts I've been mulling over about the intersections of the fine arts and the liberal arts. My question at a something of a base pragmatic level is, what programmatically would incorporating this kind of study look like at a place like St. John's or elsewhere? How would we go about making first steps in this direction?
Well, that's certainly a wonderful question to be asked. Thank you for it, David. And the reason why I say it's a wonderful question to be asked, because as much as I was invited to address the St. John's community, I'm not a member of it. And so I'm honored by the question. I will say in one sense, see chapter 10, okay, in my book. That's a quick shorthand, but that's not very informative. Boy, pragmatic steps to take. Perhaps the first pragmatic step I would take if I were a member of a faculty is that I would try to have a summer seminar on two things. Why do we want to incorporate the arts, and what do we want to incorporate? And it would be purely a discussion, in other words, sort of what we think art is or might be. And then it would be a discussion of works that might, and by the way, works, I mean all the way from recitals to studio art and so forth. the full range. I would have a discussion of what works we might want to incorporate. Now that is a rather huge undertaking, but there is a kind of beginning intuitive canon, I think, that most people could develop with about a month's worth of work. It wouldn't be complete, it wouldn't be whole. It would be a starter point, and that's exactly what would be needed. I would not have expectations if you wanted to do something within a year. I certainly wouldn't want to have anything formulated until the second semester, of course, and I would think actually a whole year, minimally. I wouldn't have any expectations of great success at first. That's not how art works, and that's not how a whole portion of a new curriculum works. So I would look at the first year as an experiment, a learning process, less about success with it, but what arts, what you find you actually mean or are examining or looking at in arts, and what art objects and what arts you need to look at. And of course, the whole thing is all going to be done in some way, shape, or form, and you'll have better ideas on this than I, in relationship to the current texts that exist in the arts and sciences. Again, you know my proclivities. I would probably, my understanding from both observation of classrooms and from discussions with tutors is that, generally speaking, I'm sorry, my throat's going dry on this. Generally speaking, a work is treated on its own in the seminar. And that, I come out of that kind of tradition and I like it. But I think what I would be trying, to do in an experiment like this would be to look at how we might have a discussion about arts, kind of in a way, like I tried to in this work, how we would relate, in this case, Alberti and Botticelli primarily, but more widely, liberal arts works and other painters, so that what you could have, while sticking with what I would consider canonical works or core text, so that you could have a discussion that really had substantive products to deal with. You would at the same time have a discussion that would be saying, in essence, not how has history shaped these works, but how do we make relations between and among the works that we have, and that's part of the conscientious effort. It would be an experiment, I suppose. You can correct me. All I say is I'm familiar with St. John's, not that I know it, but that might be an opportunity as well. And I would be really excited about seeing what all my colleagues thought should be included. That's the basket that comes to the summer picnic. I mean, that's the fun. And there would be a considerable amount of learning about inventing the curriculum for this, about curriculum as invention. Now, I know that the curriculum committee discusses texts, pulling them in and out with great care. But it's not a de novo operation, and this will be close to that. I don't know if that's anywhere near what you were asking, David, but that's how I would begin. And I wouldn't, one other thing, I probably wouldn't, you could probably take a little lesson, again, it kind of appears in my book, but you could probably take a lesson from a nice college, Thomas More College, which interestingly enough, has a seminar every year. It's a Western Civ based seminar, all Cortex, all great books. All the students take it at the same time, which means that the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors are all taking this course at the same time. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you're admitted to the school, you might come in when, in fact, the second, it's a four course sequence or 4-year sequence. So you might come into the college, it's a small college, you might come into the college and you might be in the Roman time, or you might be in the modern time. And then the next year you will begin with the Greeks, and then you'll go through the Romans, and then you'll go to the medievals, or some such sequence as that. So what happens is that the students are not necessarily thinking automatically in terms of the sequence, the historical sequence. That only happens when it's every 4 years. So you might do something similarly in that you might say to yourself, well, what portion of the arts, both historically, so to speak, and chronologically might be a better word, and what portion of the arts in the sense of what arts do we want to select, do we want to deal with this year, and then next year, and then next year. I think that might be a better experimental basis.
Scott, could I interject a question from a slightly different angle? I'll just jump in here. I was thinking about this during certain parts of your talk, and then some of the conversation with Phil and Martha kind of brought it into sharper relief for me. I was thinking about Hannah Arendt's treatment of action in the human condition, and it occurs to me that at least some of the way you're talking about invention and the arts reminds me very much of her view, the language about unpredictability and irreversibility and sort of self-disclosure through action of something that's not really there in advance. We kind of find ourselves in the doing of it. And I just wonder about, I mean, in a way, that's almost my whole question or prompt, is just to see what your reaction to that is. But in thinking about it, it seems to me sometimes, and there's some thinkers one could point to, where you might look at the treatment of human action or politics and see it as being assimilated into aesthetic categories, let's say. Mm-hmm. And then I'm wondering, I'm sort of feeling a little bit of the opposite happening here. It's almost as though the arts are being assimilated into, being turned into a kind of human action in Arendt's treatment, which for her is different than art and the way she lays it all out. So I guess I just wonder how you play with all of that.
Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit too here to answer your question, Walter. Yes, Phil asked the necessity possibility question. Well, I treat a curriculum as if it were a work of art. I said that, and if that's true, then there would be questions of necessity and possibility in this, and the whole problem becomes how you connect these different moving pieces together and who does the connecting, including the students especially. I would, and you can, aside from the question of whether all arts have been invented, and I don't think they are, that was the reference to Susan Sontag and the erotics business, okay? I think that you could also boost this up and basically say that this is how I think or feel. This is not a well worked out statement. But I think most, not all, Western civilization discussions are political in some way, shape, or form, quasi-cultural political. And they are statements of not so much regimes, but of what perhaps the how shall we say, the underlying growth of arts and sciences that supported the development of the themes of Western civilization. And those themes are largely actional, what we carry forward into the future as the sort of Straussian point of view, that as we learn what the important themes are, we become good citizens and can carry them forward. I have no, it's perfectly legitimate way to go. Myself, I'm kind of thinking that arts and sciences are the foundations for our communities. And so what really does matter is these discoveries or inventions, and how they end up contributing and building and making communities, whether they be political or whether they be artisanal or whether they be scientific, possible, or religious. Those are my sort of long-term interests out of this. And I would, if it's just a question, there again, the whole issue of necessities and possibilities of a civilization in terms of its arts and sciences. I mean, that's such a complex question. I'm not sure I could even begin to do it any justice now, but I'm aware of it being there as something I'd have to think about. Does that address what you were asking?
Yeah, it does. I'll keep thinking, but I think my basic thought was, again, maybe going back to some of what Mr. LeCure was saying, but that the way you're describing the kind of freedom that's accomplished in the arts in this way might seem on a certain account to be more like the freedom established through human action, but then you might want to reserve a different kind of establishment of freedom through the liberal arts or the arts more broadly. And so I'll keep thinking about it, but your response definitely advanced it. But we do have a written.
And I would be interested in how you end up thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'd like to know.
We've got a written question here that maybe circles back to your earlier exchange with Mr. LeCure from Matthew Post. Thanks for offering this insightful and provocative talk and panel discussion. I would be grateful if we could return to Mr. LeCure's final remark. What is dangerous in Mr. Lee's discussion of the arts? Does Mr. Lee agree? To call a discussion this is parenthetical, to call a discussion dangerous is not necessarily an objection or a critique. It could also be praise. It depends on the details. So maybe we could ask Mr. LeCure to clarify, and then Scott, you can respond. Thank you. Matthew.
Any attempt over the decades to get Mr. LeCure to clarify has mostly been futile. That's whatever else I do, that's not one of my signature moves. But what I mean by dangerous is the case that, Scott, the case that you make for the liberal arts, emphasizing the arts part of it, seems to me to be very powerful. But in the back of my thoughts is the question, in the service of what? And I want to present one possibility to see what you think of it. I don't know how far this goes on the dangerous issue, but the natural sciences seem ultimately to emphasize analytical thought and even reductive thought, to reduce a complex phenomenon to its simplest possible components. When you say invention, do you mean a defense of the complex, of that which cannot be reduced to simpler components?
Okay, I think those are, okay, we have three or four questions here, and I'm going to try to take each because they're so all worthy of thought. And remind me if I forget. Working backwards, I would say that the complex can usually be reduced to simples in the sense that you can find what elements are necessary in order to have that which is built into something that is complex. But because at least in the arts, you reduce it to those elements, if you rest in that analysis, you will have lost the work. And the object is not to lose the work. In the sciences, it's fair to say that there is this reductionism. It's a commonplace, and it is hard to imagine how the sciences could proceed without some kind of reduction and isolation. It just simply is hard to understand it. But then what happens is usually the technological products that are produced by the sciences have strong, not identical, similarities in their complexity to the arts. Now, these two questions were asked, and I think there's a kind of a underlying this. These two questions were asked as sort of also part of a danger question in the sense of, number one, are we really doing a disservice to our humanity if what we do is we reduce everything to something, break it apart, and declare it to be really a matter of simplicity? If only you would acquire the expertise or a good, really solid working knowledge of science, you would understand this, then you would know this, and you would see this. But the problem is that, as with other fields, most scientists know relatively, they have principles and they have gone through a curriculum that has taken them to where they are, but most of them are experts in what are relatively small areas. And I feel somewhat confident about this, having worked with a number of scientists over my life. The other possibility of this is that there's a danger, not only of losing, as it were, the world, but the danger of technology, which can harm us. And I have to say, I don't think that there are any guarantees, nor have there ever been any guarantees that technology is not going to harm us. But I do think that the technology of liberal arts, in the broadest sense, not necessarily just a St. John's curriculum, but in a broad sense of having to think about what it is to have a freedom to produce, freedom to discover, a freedom to invent. All of these, this danger is mitigated by the possession of that. And when it's not possessed, yeah, there's a serious problem, but I don't think we can, I hate to say this, but I don't think we can get the genie back in the bottle. So education is the real solution to this problem, this other problem of danger. And then there's one that really Matt, I think, was indicating, which is that suppose you did take something of what I'm saying seriously about curricula, well, what would be the implications? And that was kind of what David was asking too. what would be the implications for liberal arts curricula, for universities in particular, but for colleges, if we took this seriously, if we really wanted to make a Bachelor of Arts degree a Bachelor of Arts degree and not a Bachelor of Humanities or a Bachelor of a Discipline degree? That would be a very serious, and I mean it, but it would be a very serious reorganization of arts and colleges. And I must say that Martha has suggested to me that Scott Buchanan had that in mind in helping to found St. John's, not just for St. John's, but for many colleges and universities. I simply would go about it with somewhat different philosophic principles. I don't know if that helps, but that's the best I can do
Scott,
right now.
Excuse me. We do have another written question, if I may, from M.W. Merritt. A wonderful lecture and very relevant to our times and to any times. I hope you can talk a bit more about possibility in a world that is in desperate need of what art can provide, and the world feels that art must be put to good use. How do you know that your art shows or makes something possible and worthwhile? Or is that not obvious? I think you've spoken to this in some ways, but
I'm sorry, what?
No, please.
I think I really like the genuineness of that question. And the reason why I like it is because it sounds to me, and the questioner can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me as if that questioner is asking him or herself, what can I do that's worthwhile? And I mean this quite sincerely. You're so lucky, if I'm right about this, you're not lucky, you're fortunate. You're fortunate to be at St. John's, if again, I'm right, and it is a student. If it's not, I apologize. But you're fortunate to be at St. John's because here really is an opportunity for you to begin to gather, as part of the process of learning how to become an artist, what really goes into making something worthwhile. And at this point, I would say that the first and foremost thing that goes into making it worthwhile is a determination that you are going to try to make something worthwhile that you really care about, whatever it might be. It could be about how friends interact. It could be about the state of the world. It could be about nature. It can be about ecology. Whatever it is that you think you could actually shape to be better because you make it, I'd say you're really ahead of the game, because you're beginning to direct your thoughts into that very hard process of asking, well, what do I have at hand? What can I begin to build with if I really have a particular feeling backed by a good beginning thought towards what needs to be accomplished. So I don't know if that's encouragement for you, but I hope it is. And I do think it's true. It doesn't really matter whether this is a student or not. It would be true of anyone who was trying to make something, especially if they were on the ground floor. People who start to learn instruments kind of have that feeling when they're going to be presenting the first time to their friends or something like that. It's a very uncomfortable feeling, but it's really the only feeling that gets you to the point of actually doing the presentation.
Thank you, Scott. I'm looking at the time, and I think we're probably getting close to our end. I thought maybe we could just go one by one and see if each of our panelists has a final word or thought or question, and then maybe just give you the last word, Scott. And before we do that, I just mentioned you very kindly offered earlier that if any students, members of our community had follow-up questions, you'd be happy to correspond with them. So maybe I'd just tell folks, if anyone wants to do so, to write to me and I can connect you. Does that sound fair enough?
And I'll certainly follow up on anything that anybody has asked here too.
Okay. So maybe Mr. LeCure, we hear from you, then Ms. Franks, then Scott, you can have the last word.
No, I just, my last thought here, I just want to thank Scott for what I think was a very, really a thought-provoking presentation. That painting, my visual memory is not particularly good, but I can see that painting right now, even though I'm not looking at it. And I think that is because of your teaching about how that painting, what that painting is a painting of. It's not a painting of a fact, but it's a painting of a possibility that I think draws me to it. Not to the painting, but to the possibility of what becomes possible through the painting. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you for what I think is a spectacular insight into that particular work of art, and through that work of art into the broader work of the liberal arts.
Thank you, Phil. That's a very generous comment. I really, truly appreciate it.
I would like to second how interesting this has been, and how many, in the terms of the lecture, possibilities seem to open from what you say. And I guess in particular, the last few exchanges, Ms. Merritt's question, seemed to me to give us a picture that might, if not respond, at least offer a sort of way forward for Mr. LeCure's question about imagination, possibility, invention in the service of what? I liked your emphasis on making, on how important it was actually to do things, and finding out the set of possibilities that are in us by doing things gives us an array that may teach us what we serve. And I liked that pathway.
Thank you, Martha. I will say that in the service of joy, the joy of learning, that's why we do it. It's in the service, the joy of learning is a lifelong occupation. And I think that that's probably the freedom, invention, joy of learning. They are three sides of the same coin. They are united, and I think that that's. I would just try to answer that one question you had at the end here. Thank you so much for all you've done for this panel and in encouraging me in over time.
Scott, let me just join in thanking you for not only the talk and your book that you're now sharing with us, but for years of friendship with the college, and for all of us who've attended ACTC over the years under your stewardship. Just so many conversations, rich conversations with folks engaged in similar efforts. And as you know, that's always been such an oasis in the year for many of us. So thank you for your years of service, and we look forward to future conversations, virtual and in person, as soon as we can again.
Well, Walter, thank you so much. Thank you for your stewardship at St. John's a gem in the constellation of institutions and liberal arts institutions. And I thank every one of the people who attended and asked the questions. And yeah, that's the whole point. The conversation, the productive conversation continues.
Very good. I think we will conclude there. Thank you all for attending. Good
Thank
evening.
you.
It was fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you, Scott.